What's the truth here? How should we interpret today's job numbers? Let's bring in the in-house economist for the Vince Coglianese Show, a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation, EJ Antoni joins us on the line. Hello, EJ.
Vince, thanks for having me back.
All right, give us the top line on the numbers today.
So the top line number doesn't look all that bad, but unfortunately, Vince, as soon as you start digging any deeper than just the face of this thing, it actually gets pretty terrible. So on the surface, it looks like we added 187,000 jobs last month, right? So, okay, it's obviously less than we were adding right when we came out of the pandemic, but it's not terrible. However, 110,000 of those jobs, that's almost 60%, were jobs that were actually just gained from previous months, but then the numbers were revised down. In other words, we were adding jobs that we thought we already had.
Right. So there's a lot of sleight of hand going on. What's the deal with downward revisions? It seems like with every jobs report, we find out that the old numbers were nowhere near as good as they claimed.
Well, it seems that way this year because that's exactly what's happened. Literally every single month so far this year, we've had a downward revision, which means that later reports show that we didn't actually add the number of jobs we thought we did. So that does a couple of things. Number one, the initial report, which is the only thing that gets all the headlines, right, that gets all the media coverage, that looked really good. But then the next month, you once again are adding jobs that you thought you already had, but most people in the media won't tell you that. So it makes every month look bigger than it actually is. And so that's, if you add that plus the semi-annual preliminary benchmark that the Bureau of Labor Statistics did a little while ago, you get basically a total overestimate of 661,000 jobs. That's 30% of all the jobs we initially thought we added this year, almost 1 in 3.
Yeah. My understanding is that the summer months so far have been the worst 3 months for job growth since the pandemic. Is that right?
Oh, absolutely. And again, once you start factoring in these downward revisions, you find that things are a lot worse than they even appear initially. For example, the month of June has essentially been cut in half from about 200,000 up to only, I think, 100,000. So when you go back and you look at these different reports, the initial estimates, blew away expectations. But now, all of a sudden, after the revisions, you find that they were missing expectations.
Now, since June, there's been a trend on part-time jobs and full-time jobs, which is interesting to me. And maybe you can give me some more perspective on this. Since June, the total number of workers that are in full-time jobs, meaning more than 35 hours per week, has actually gone down in the United States by about 670,000. Meanwhile, part-time workers have risen by just over 1 million. What does that mean for the economy when we're losing full-time jobs and gaining part-time jobs?
Well, it's very similar to what we're seeing in manufacturing, or at least these two things are pointing in the same direction. So as the economy tends to go downhill, businesses will shift away from hiring full-time and they'll start hiring part-time. And as people leave full-time work, they'll replace them with part-time workers. So you do tend to see that general shift as you move into a recession, and that's very likely what we're seeing right now. Now, the way this ties in to manufacturing is that sector in particular tends to lead the rest of the labor market when it cusps over that hill and it starts to trend back down again as you go into recession. Well, what has manufacturing done this year? Year to date, if you look at where we are compared to January's numbers, we've added less than 0.1% to the jobs in that sector. I mean, that is as anemic as it gets. And we can very likely expect that to now turn down in the months ahead. In other words, we're going to start losing jobs.
Joe Biden today, in another moment of this Rose Garden statement, was bragging that unemployment is below 14%. Take a listen to this.
Just this morning, we learned that the economy created 190,000 jobs last month. All told, we've added 13.5 million jobs since I took office. Around 800,000 of them manufacturing jobs. We created more jobs in 2 years than any president ever created in a single four-year term. We did it in 2 years. What's more, When I took office, the unemployment rate was 6.3%. The nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office predicted that it would not get below 4% until the end of 2025. Now, the unemployment rate has been below 14% for the last 19 months.
Amazing. Unemployment is below 14%, EJ. What a great success.
I know, and life expectancy is above 3 years old. I mean, dear goodness, this president has achieved so much for this country. I can't even, where do I even begin?
You really are shifting. You are really moving the goalposts if you're like, hey, at least we're below 14% on unemployment.
Well, it's exactly like when the president starts talking, about wages and how much they're up. And yes, that part of the story is true. Of course, wages have risen dramatically. Just with the data we got this morning, average hourly earnings are up 13% since he took office. Ordinarily, that'd be fantastic. Except what's been going on behind the scenes? Well, number of hours worked has actually been getting cut. So you're not actually working that many hours anymore. But much more importantly is the fact that prices are up even faster. Prices are up something like almost 17% by the time we get the August data in. And so people are demonstrably poor. The average family has seen their weekly paychecks go up by something like $230 since Biden took office. But what they can actually buy with those larger paychecks has dropped more than $100 a week.
Wow. Meanwhile, built into what Biden just said is a routine lie that he constantly wields about what a great jobs president he is. As I understand it, EJ, the government-imposed lockdowns meant that the economy lost just shy of 10 million jobs. He's taking credit now for 13.5 million jobs created. The reality seems to me is that, well, no, 10 million of those jobs were actually thrown into the garbage by the government. And as soon as the government got out of the way, people went back to work. Is that right?
Right. And, virtually every single labor force metric is right now below the pre-pandemic trend. So we still have not recovered to where we need to be. And, the fact that we have so many people out of the labor force on disability right now, in part because the Biden administration changed the rules to make it easier for people to be on disability and to remove things like work requirements. So now you've artificially shrunken the labor force. The labor force participation rate is artificially high. The unemployment rate is artificially low. Things look better than they actually are. But, even if Biden wants to play this frankly stupid game of who added more jobs, okay, then Trump between May of 20 and January of 21 added more jobs than any other president did, whether it was in 4 years or 8 years. So, I mean, how is this helpful to play these kinds of statistical games?
Yeah, it's not. He's looking for a place to hide with an abysmal record. Some reporter, I don't know who it was, but the conclusion of Biden's remarks today, the press shouted a number of questions, and somebody asked what the question that was on my mind as I was listening to the president. Wait a second. You're talking about how great the economy is. What about all of the people living paycheck to paycheck? Listen to this question.
Have a good Labor Day weekend, and God bless you all.
Sir, why are so many Americans living paycheck to paycheck? Sir, why did the interaction so many of your sons join business partners?
Why are so many Americans living paycheck to paycheck? Earlier this week, a new Lending Club report revealed that 61% of American adults are now living paycheck to paycheck, meaning they're not able to make ends meet, and they don't have any reserves left to save any money, EJ.
Right. And American families are frankly now having to eat the bitter fruit from the tree of Bidenomics. A big reason why we saw 730-something thousand people move into the labor force last month, and only about, 1 in 10 of them, somewhere around that, be able to get full-time work. That is because so many people can't make ends meet. They're having to take second or third jobs. You're seeing spouses who previously were staying at home having to go out and work because the one breadwinner family just isn't cutting it anymore. Savings are depleted. Credit cards are maxed out. Just earlier this week, we got data for the month of July, where we saw one of the biggest spending jumps in months. I think it might have been the biggest since January. It was fueled literally entirely by a depletion of savings because incomes didn't rise at all.
So the part-time numbers you and I were just talking about a few minutes ago, that the part-time numbers are up. I believe you've told me in the past that part-time employment can be deceiving because there's some double counting going on. If a man takes 2 jobs in order to feed his family, that's counted twice as, that created 2 part-time jobs.
That's exactly right. This is where the joke comes from that I've heard several people tell now, which is that Bidenomics is so successful, I don't have 1 job anymore, I have 4. Because every time I go out and I get another job, I literally get counted again in these non-farm payroll statistics. And again, that's that headline number that you see every single month.
It's wild. And then credit card debt is every time you see people are living paycheck to paycheck, you start to wonder how much more debt are people going into to make ends meet, to cover their shortfalls. And it looks like the number right now is well past $1 trillion in credit card debt in the United States. This is a record level of credit card debt, EJ. What's happening there?
Well, very simply, people can't afford to live in Biden's America. And so they are having to cut corners wherever they can, and they're having to stretch their dollar as much as they can. But you can only do that so much. The necessities still have to get paid. And so they're relying on credit cards to be able to do that. But what's really scary is things that we previously would have considered necessities, people are beginning to skip on, which is going to put a lot of Americans in incredibly dangerous financial positions. There's this big trend now, Vince, where homeowners are skipping homeowner insurance. They're literally not having their home and everything in it insured because they can't afford the 20, 30, or 40% increase in insurance premiums that we've seen the last couple of years. I mean, when these families meet with some kind of disaster, it's going to now be a financial disaster too.
Yes, and it'll wreck them. They won't have that home anymore, and they're not getting it back. It's disasters compounded upon themselves, and the government's right at the center of all of those decisions. Is truly awful. EJ Antoni, thank you as always for giving us a true assessment of what's really going on here as the White House tries to dress this thing up and suggest that Bidenomics is going along swimmingly. We know better thanks to your work. Thank you, EJ.